Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Jana Beranek, SVP with Ipsos's UX team. Jana, you have the floor.
Thanks, Helen. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Jana Beranek, one of the SVPs of UX at Ipsos, and I'm joined by Rick Elmanson, one of the VPs on our UX team at Ipsos. And today we're going to share a recent study we did on e-commerce apps and what you can do to ensure a high-quality user experience of your online shopping experience. So we're going to start with data showing how the pandemic has made e-commerce grow faster than expected. We'll talk about how you can measure the UX of your e-commerce experience to make sure you can capture the increased volume of customer traffic that's trying your apps right now. And then we'll look at a recent study we did on the UX of apparel and grocery apps. And finally, we'll discuss 5 things we think all e-commerce apps need to do, and another 5 questions you should probably ask as you think about the UX of your online shopping experience. So in a recent interview with Ipsos, Chris Brandt, CMO of Chipotle, noted that their digital business has been accelerated 3 years into the future, and that once people try e-commerce solutions, and delivery in particular, great experiences are likely to stick. We're also seeing that year-over-year online revenue growth was up 68% as of mid-April, and year-over-year e-commerce orders were up 129% as of April 21st. In addition, we're seeing similar feedback through the Ipsos Coronavirus Consumer Tracker that shows similar trends as a result of social distancing and shelter-in-place orders. The technologies shown here have all seen an increase in usage as a result of the pandemic. In particular, restaurant delivery and pickup, as well as grocery delivery, have seen an uptick, along with other essentials like banking apps and telemedicine. As the trend of digital acceleration continues, it mirrors what many people are self-reporting. They plan to continue using these tools because they see the benefits of these technologies. And that means experiences that are useful and usable, maybe even delightful, could result in long-term adoption. So, how do you know if your online shopping experience delivers? Well, I'm sure that many of you are already looking at predefined measurable KPIs like app downloads, user reviews, and metrics like abandoned shopping carts and sales conversion rates. As many of us in UX know, you can also seek feedback directly from consumers who can give you good insights. But what about actually measuring the user experience of your e-commerce app? Is that even possible? We say the answer is yes. Usability and the user experience can be quantified. And it matters. Our data shows that there's a strong correlation between the UX of your website or app with future intent to use. And it matters because consumers have choices and they will choose what's easy. So next, Rick Elmanson is going to share with you how we measure the experience at Ipsos.
Hi, thanks, Jana. And there we go. So as a starting point, a measure of the user experience needs to assess some aspects of usability. So we found that 2 important dimensions of usability are learnability, how easy it is for the new users to learn an app or product, and operability, how well it works for experienced users. But in addition to usability, a UX measure should assess the emotional aspects of the experience that stem from the relevance of the product to the user. So this includes product fit, how well the product meets the specific needs and desires of the user, and inspiration, the extent to which the product inspires continued use. And finally, there's the product's look and feel or aesthetics, which is critical in attracting first-time users. In 2011, we began work creating a scale that would incorporate all these dimensions of the user experience, but would also be short and easy to administer. By 2013, the refinement and validation of the scale, which we called the UX score, was complete. It is a 10-item scale assessing the full range of the user experience that can be used both as a predictive and as a formative assessment tool. As a predictive tool, the total UX score assesses the overall user experience and predicts future use with measures like the Net Promoter Score and ratings of intent to use. And it correlates with these measures about 0.75, which accounts for about half of the variance. So what this means is that if your UX score is low, there's probably something in your product with usability that's affecting the future use and the loyalty of your product. The UX score can also be used as a formative assessment tool. The items in the score load onto 3 separate factors of usability, relevance, and aesthetics. By comparing these subscores, UX issues can be narrowed down to one of these dimensions even before qualitative research is begun. But when coupled with qualitative research, the UX score becomes a really powerful tool for improving the user experience and increasing the use of your product. So Jana will now describe the research project that illustrates how we use the UX score and qualitative research together to deliver rich insights. Jana?
Thanks, Rick. So now I'm going to walk you through what we did. And our approach was started with remote unmoderated testing on Userlytics. So Userlytics is a user testing platform that allows us to create unmoderated studies that participants can complete remotely, which is great in this time that we're not doing face-to-face research. Similar to a moderated usability test, participants are asked to think aloud as they do tasks to help us understand what works and what doesn't work about the app. In addition to completing a series of 4 or 5 tasks, the participant could rate the ease or difficulty of each task. Then Userlytics is recording each session, so the researcher can go back and review the audio and video of each session. So in this screenshot, you see the participant of the study, and to the side, you see the UI of their device. You can also hear them as they explain what they're doing for each task. For apparel apps, we tested 3 brands, The Gap, Lululemon, and Macy's. And we had participants complete 4 common tasks: shopping for items and putting them in their cart, comparing 2 pairs of socks and putting the less expensive one in the cart, finding sales items, and finding the fastest free delivery option. For grocery delivery apps, we had users test Instacart, Kroger, and Whole Foods. And something to note here is that each of these apps works on a very different business model. So Instacart provides shopping, ordering, and delivering for many different stores. I would say Kroger is more of a traditional grocery shopping experience. And the Whole Foods app turns out to be a gateway to the Amazon shopping service rather than a shopping app in and of itself. So some of you may think this isn't an equal comparison, but as many of us know, consumers really don't care about what your business model is. What they want to do is have groceries delivered. So one of the things that's really important as you think about how you want to build your e-commerce app is to understand who your competitors are and how they are helping consumers meet their goals, like getting fresh groceries delivered to their homes efficiently and accurately. So the tasks that we had grocery shoppers complete were similar to the Apparel app. We had them shop for items they commonly buy at the grocery store and place them in their cart. We had them compare 2 types of crackers and place the less expensive one in their cart. We had them find sales items, find the fastest free delivery option, and we also had them complete the checkout process here. So once we had them do all the tasks, Then they completed the UX Score survey. We sampled 100 participants for each app, and each person tested 2 apps using their own device. So they got to test on the phone that they feel most comfortable with. The sample size allowed us to explore the impact of things like age, gender, and phone operating system, as well as being able to look at the impact of task success and time on task to see if there were any relevant or significant differences in the UX score and also on their intent to use in the future. So I'm just going to say that I'm guessing many of you who work in this space won't be surprised by the key findings of our research. They may also seem obvious to those of you who use apps regularly. The important things to consider here, though, is that in many cases, these issues persist. Despite many of us knowing or thinking that they're obvious obstacles to a great experience, we still haven't managed to design them out of the user experience. So we'll start with the apparel apps and what we saw. So overall, apparel apps generally perform well. They follow the standard e-commerce model of shopping, where you navigate or browse to find an item you like, you pick the color and size and place it in your cart. Apparel apps also have features that are really engaging to users. So there's a variety of images, you can interact with those images. There are videos, and they often have thematic filters that allow people to kind of shop by a holiday or shop by an activity. Another interesting thing about apparel apps is that they appear to be more targeted to certain user demographics. And in some cases, that may limit the brand reach. So we did see some impact to UX scores, which Rick will share with you now.
Thanks. So based on the UX score, the overall user experience differed across the 3 apps. Macy's and the Gap had comparable user experience, while Lululemon had a lower experience score. So to understand this pattern a little better, we broke down the results in a couple different ways. First, we get control again here. First, we broke down the scores in terms of their subscores. And what you see is that the 3 apps didn't differ in terms of their aesthetics, but rather the differences that we see overall are reflected in the usability and the relevance subscores. So what this means that all of the sites looked good, but there were differences in their usability and relevance to the users. A second way that we broke it down was by age group. And what we see here is that primarily in the older age groups, the user experience of Lululemon drops off compared to Macy's and Gap. So this is an example of a pattern that, a drop off of users outside a target demographic that might warrant additional research and or probing for qualitatively as to what's going on. So Jana will describe now some of the qualitative results that are behind these patterns.
Great. So we did see some things that really worked well for apparel apps. And all of this data comes from the Think Aloud protocols that people described what they were doing as they were trying to complete all the tasks. So for those of you who are familiar with usability testing, this was very much the same experience. So first of all, users like to be able to shop as a guest, especially when it comes to their first experience of an app. They really don't want to commit to creating an account until they know it's an app that they'll use in the future. Another thing is that they like it to be easy to select delivery or pickup options. And Macy's did a great job of this. You can see a quote from one of our participants. The Macy's one gives you options, free curbside pickup. It's right here. And so any clear offer that is free shipping or free curbside pickup is really appreciated. Finally, as is the case with many apps and websites, Participants want a search feature that returns accurate, comprehensive results, and that has lots of good filter and sort options. And Macy's does that better than most. Macy's has a wide array of products, and yet that quote at the top, it's 100% easy shopping experience because this user found every filter, every item, sizes, colors, all easy to go through. So categories were easy to navigate versus Lululemon that didn't have quite as robust of a filtering and sorting option. There are opportunities, though, for Apparel Apps. So one issue that bothered many participants was being sent to their shopping cart or returned to the item page that they had just purchased from instead of being allowed to keep shopping. So you see that quote, usually when you go to an order website, it tells you to keep shopping, but this one just stayed like you wanted to keep shopping the same thing. People really want to be able to keep adding to their cart, just like I'm sure most businesses would like for users to keep adding to their carts. Users also want to be able to understand their shipping options. As I just mentioned, people really liked that Macy's made it very clear that they had free curbside pickup and free shipping. But in some cases, users were required to log in to select shipping options. And they want to really be able to assess their shipping options without obstacles and understand the cost and timing without having to log in. Finally, everyone loves a sale, and they expect that sale items will be in a designated area that's easy to find. They're looking for straightforward language and labels like deals or sales or clearance. And that simply wasn't the case for users on the Gap app or Lululemon trying to find the sales. Gap uses a discount icon that's a bookmark with a $sign in it. And Lululemon labels their sales section, "We made too much," which is kind of cute, but at the same time, it wasn't intuitive. So when the label doesn't clearly call out sales discounts or deals, people wonder if they actually have that section or whether they're just going to have to sort through different items to understand pricing. The other thing that we are able to look at in this type of research is the ease of use ratings for each of the tasks. And so we did see an interesting trend between Macy's being easier for women and Lululemon being easier for males. And when you watch their behavior, it becomes clear that one of the things women like to do is search and then narrow their options. They also often are shopping for others. So they might be shopping for their kids. So they want to be able to quickly get to children in a certain age range and a certain item. And that was very easy to do on Macy's. On Lululemon, on the other hand, makes the sections of shopping very clear. And so men would go in and say, "Oh, there's a men's section. I'm gonna go right to the men. The clothing categories are right there," which I like. So that very easy, like one click into the section that they wanted was something that people really connected with. There weren't gender differences for Gap, but people did note that it was not easily accessible to find the menu for the different categories and required too many clicks to get to the relevant category. So that may be why it didn't kind of come out at the top or the bottom of either of the ratings. Another thing that we look at is the different tasks. In this case, ease of comparing items was pretty similar. You can see there in the second set of bars, pretty similar across the board. And the scores were good, but what we found is that while users were able to accomplish the task, it wasn't necessarily the way they wanted to accomplish the task. Because of standard e-commerce models, they expected to be able to select a couple of items and put them in a comparison view. And instead, because none of the apps that we tested here had that option, they would tend to use the product grid view and scroll up and down through lists of products to compare things like color and length and availability and price. One user said, "I don't see a compare button. I'm expecting to pull up to click compare and compare them." Another thing that users would do would be to put 3 similar things into their shopping cart and then scroll up and down to compare the attributes of that product. So that was something that, although they were able to do it, it wasn't as easy as they had hoped and didn't really meet their expectations. Another thing that I've already alluded to, but in particular, you can see that Lululemon scored low on finding sale items. Lululemon generally had the most obstacles to this task because of the label, "We made too much." That didn't signal sale items to many. The other thing is that when people tried another method, which was to sort on price, they were not able to do that in Lululemon. So one person said it kind of looked like they didn't want you to find it. But really, that expectation that they would be able to figure out some way to cost things from low to high is something that users like and that they want, and that wasn't always easy. So now we will look at grocery apps. And it's maybe not surprising that grocery apps scored lower for UX than for apparel apps. So we have a few ideas of why we think this might be. Grocery delivery is a newer offering with fewer design patterns. So there's not such a strong model that people might be expecting, and there's not such a strong model that designers are adhering to. I think there may also be some kind of carryover from the brick and mortar grocery experience, where stores vary in layout and in product arrangement. So if you think of your experience walking into a grocery store that isn't your usual location, you probably recall that it can be hard to find things, and sometimes items are grouped differently than you would expect. So that may impact the ability of users to quickly understand how the grocery categories work as well across the different apps. Another element that makes grocery shopping a challenge online is product variability due to the nature of what you're buying, right? So freshness of produce, the cut of the meat, the flavor of prepared food. It's a lot harder to illustrate and make selectable in an app. So it's much harder to say, I want a large or small apple, I want a ripe or unripe banana. And that making that variation selectable is also not as common in apps. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, in grocery, there are apps that let you shop anywhere. And there are grocery brands that really don't directly facilitate purchases, and a lot of variation in between. So knowing how users want grocery shopping to work is key to helping create a great user experience for them. And I'll let Rick share with you a little bit more about what the UX score said. Rick?
Okay. So the quantitative results from the UX score, you notice a couple things. First, there is differences among the sites, and the differences among the different apps are greater than they are in the apparel. So in the apparel, the top, there wasn't much a significant difference between Macy's and the Gap, but here all 3 sites differed from each other, and the range of scores is greater as well. So there's just more variation in the experience within this category. Breaking it down, you see a similar pattern. There's the greatest differences in usability and relevance. There's more similarity in the aesthetics, so that Whole Foods and Kroger had similar aesthetic scores, but they were still below that of Instacart. But the bulk of the differences that you see in the user experience are in this category based for usability and for relevance. And unlike the apparel, there were no age differences that we saw in the UX score, but we did notice that there was, for one of the apps, Kroger, a difference in the experience of iPhone versus Android. And the Android iPhone difference might be a result of the trend to do iOS development first, and in some cases port the code into Android rather than invest a full development effort in Android. And surprisingly, we found some major e-commerce retailers still only have iPhone apps, demonstrating that there's a gap in consideration of Android as a device. So that in the case of Kroger, that if you were doing the tasks on Android, it was not as good of an experience as those that had an iPhone. Now, Jana will go through some of the qualitative results that we found.
Great. Thanks, Rick. So what works for grocery? Well, many people, similarly to apparel, like to shop without logging in or signing up. So they prefer to shop as a guest without obstacles. And this is something that Instacart really supports. They let people get quite a ways in the shopping experience before they require any sort of credentialing. In addition, participants like the flexibility of Instacart that lets them shop at the store they prefer, rather than being limited to one brand. So you see the quote on the right, it's my go-to app because I get to choose the store to shop from. In addition, participants like that Instacart provided a default delivery option. So in the case where people are stuck at home and not having to schedule around leaving for work or other activities, a 2-hour default allows them to skip the scheduling process, which can be kind of painful. But as you can see, the user quote there at the bottom, it says right here, within 2 hours, and it gives you a list of delivery times. Today is the earliest within 2 hours. That was really simple. So when you can provide a default option that makes people's lives easier, they are usually very interested in taking that option. And this might be one of those places where the effects of the pandemic are changing the way that people want to do their work. So they want to get it scheduled as soon as possible versus when we were all leaving home to go to the office, we needed to schedule around when someone would be at the house to get the groceries. So some of these things you may need to revisit as you think about what is the model, the mental model now for how people want to receive their groceries. Opportunities for grocery apps is that in a couple of cases, consumers weren't able to directly put things into their cart. So in the case of Kroger, they were put it on a shopping list and transfer it to a cart. And that just doesn't really track to how people shop online. Whole Foods exacerbated the problem by not letting people shop with their app unless they had an Amazon account and were logged in. This was unexpected by people who shop at Whole Foods in the brick and mortar stores without an Amazon account. So this is an example where the business model is interfering with the UX of the app because it doesn't match the user's mental model. They don't necessarily know that that's going to be a requirement when they download the app. And in fact, it's not something that's mentioned in the introduction to the app as you first start using it. And finally, participants using the grocery apps had a similar problem to apparel with product comparison. So although they were able to determine the lower priced item, they had to do it by scrolling through the product grid, or once again, by putting 2 items in the cart and then clicking on the cart to compare. Many people indicated they miss having a comparison tool like they would normally find in e-commerce apps for other types of products. It was just a miss in all 6 of the apps that we tested in this study that there were no comparison tools available. And then again, as I mentioned for apparel, we have some insights from the ease of use ratings as people were doing these tasks. And you can see the tasks along the bottom of the charts of what they were trying to do. So finding products was more difficult on Whole Foods. Search was used by many participants shopping for groceries. So they knew what they normally bought at the store, and they would just put those words in and look at the results. And unfortunately, many participants got null results for common items on the Whole Foods app. It's not clear why this happened, but it was definitely frustrating for users. One person tried to type in water and couldn't find water. And it was frustrating because they were pretty sure that Whole Foods would sell water. It seemed like a very straightforward search, but they were getting null results. So I think it's really important to understand how your search is working for grocery, because this is an area where people seemed much less likely to browse. Another thing was finding sale items. This one was really difficult at first because the use of traditional grocery models didn't translate. So many people saw weekly ads or weekly specials, they saw coupons, but they didn't equate that to sale items. You know, really that idea of like a weekly circular didn't translate to online shopping. So again, many people went to search and they tried to find sales or deals or reduced price or other terms which returned null results. And in this case, this was across all apps. Those search terms did not work. So, so there was just some confusion. One user said, you know, how do I see if something's on sale? I know Kroger does weekly specials, but they couldn't really understand how that worked on the app. And also, you know, another person who said, I think discounted items are in coupons, but I'm not sure. So understanding what things were currently for sale was not an easy task, although people ultimately decided in most cases that coupons were the best way to go for that. Finally, we see here that Kroger and Whole Foods performed poorly on delivery and checkout. Both Kroger and Whole Foods presented users obstacles to setting up delivery and checkout. Users didn't expect to have to create an account to get possible delivery times in Kroger. So one user said, you know, I don't have this Plus card from the store, so now I can't see available timing. And they're like, I don't have this card, so maybe that's why I can't continue. I think in situations like that, a lot of times users don't know if it's something they really can't do or if they're doing it wrong. Similarly, they didn't expect to have to switch to Amazon Shopping to check out with Whole Foods. Someone said, it doesn't have options for pickup or delivery. I guess I just have to go pick it up. Instacart, on the other hand, only required a zip code to confirm an available delivery window. So there are options to make it easy, but it's not always made easy by the particular app. All right. So what does all of this mean for you as you're thinking about how your app should work and whether or not your user experience is great, and how would you even know? So I think the most important thing, if you can take away just one thing, it's that the user experience of an app is a major determiner of future use. Across both categories, our Ipsos UX score correlates 0.75 with the self-reported likelihood to use in the future. The apps that another thing that we really saw was that apps consistently perform well for aesthetics. If you'll remember the two sets of slides that Rick shared with us, they do really well on aesthetics, but they score much lower relatively on usability and relevance. And when the score drops off, that's where it drops. So businesses need to ensure that their e-commerce experiences don't just look good, but also work well. And to be clear, I'm not saying that making an app look good is easy, but branding is pretty well established. And the visual design of a product gets to leverage that knowledge. So if you think about the investments that have been made over time on branding and marketing and consumer market research on branding, that at times and in many cases has been extensive for a lot of big brands. But in many cases, the branding and visual assets that come out of those processes have been created for print media or for television and brick and mortar channels. So it's not uncommon for applied visual design to interfere with usability. And so sometimes we see that the style guide that's developed and the design patterns work well in a print style or in an online ad, but when it comes to actually having to interact with that visual design to complete tasks, that the visual design can make it more difficult to use. The other thing to keep in mind is not nearly as many businesses have long history of building digital products. So a grocery store didn't start out building apps, and their branding hasn't been focused on being applied to digital products. So making products usable and relevant is new to a lot of organizations, and as a result takes additional focus and resources. So we recommend that design of products be user-centered to ensure that you're meeting the needs and the goals of consumers and understanding what they really want. Another thing that I know is so hard in product development and app development is to make sure that timelines allow for testing within the sprint or development cycles. And finally, testing needs to be conducted with real users and not proxies whenever possible. So making sure that you're testing with consumers, and to the extent that you can test with them in their own environment, that's really helpful. And that's one of the nice things about this remote unmoderated testing, which is available through a number of testing platforms, that you can have people test using their own phones, and you can also have them test in their own homes. So that's very close to simulating what those real use cases would be. So if we're thinking about 5 things we think your e-commerce app should always do, first we would say, let customers be guests with as few obstacles to shopping as possible. So the more that they can get in their cart and the more invested they become in terms of the time that they spend shopping, the more likely they will be to complete the shopping process if they don't have a bunch of obstacles. But the earlier that you put that obstacle in their way, the more likely we believe they are to abandon when they have other options. So search is super important. Help your customers find the items they need quickly by making sure that your search is accurate and comprehensive. And if you have a lot of products, then you've got to make sure that you have robust filters that they understand and sorting options that they expect. Make it easy for users to keep shopping, right? The more they put in the cart, the better. So don't send them to checkout after they put something in the cart, or put them back on that page for the item they just purchased. Give them the option to keep shopping and give them ways to explore additional products. Be sure to use clear language and indicators for sales and discounts, and give users the tools they need to find the lowest prices. They do have lots of options, and shopping online does compel people to look for a low price. And so the easier that they can confirm that they've got a low price in their basket, the more comfortable that they'll be with continuing to shop. And finally, make sure that your app works equally well on an iPhone or an Android operating system. We were very surprised to find that a couple of apps that we had thought we might test for this project didn't have Android versions. And so you're missing a huge opportunity with consumers if you don't do that. You're also missing a huge opportunity if your app simply doesn't perform well. So it's important to build for each operating system separately and to test with people who use those phones. So I know, also you want to make sure that you're not just testing on iPhone, but that you're testing on Android. And then there are some questions to consider. You may want to dig deeper into some topics. These may not be relevant for every project that you're doing, but I think in many cases they're worth asking to decide if you need to explore. This top one goes back to the login question. How do you balance what the business wants to know about shoppers versus letting them quickly fill their carts? So what is a need to know versus a nice to know? and how can you get people into the flow of shopping without missing out on the key data elements that you want or need to understand who's shopping with you. Another really interesting thing to consider is there a reason you should use layouts and interaction design that is customized or optimized for your particular set of products? Or should you use ones that are standard and already familiar to shoppers? Shoppers definitely have very clear models of e-commerce these days. And so to deviate from those, to make your app more interesting or to appeal to a certain subset of users does have risks. So thinking about what are the trade-offs there and figuring out who you should test with to validate those trade-offs. A question that's becoming really important now is, do you need to make your app more accessible for users outside your original design target? So as you think about grocery apps, we are definitely seeing that older demographics are starting to explore digital solutions. And grocery apps are a clear opportunity to hit a group of people that are not as likely to want to go out right now because they're concerned about health and the impact to older members of our community. So they may be more willing to try a grocery app. But if you didn't originally design with them in mind, you may need to revisit, what are your terms? What are your labels? How large are your tap targets? What are the things that you need to do to make sure your app is accessible? If you think back to the drop-off that we saw in Lululemon, the target age started, where we started to see the drop-off was over 35. And so you may want to ask, is that important? Do you care? Or do you need, has your testing up to this point maybe been a little too focused and your design efforts a little too focused on millennials and Gen Z, so you're missing out on an opportunity? A fourth one that I think is really important, but depends on how much you can influence is, do your brand guidelines and design patterns help or hurt the usability of your app? And can you make sure that they're not breaking the experience? And finally, I think it's really important to think about who is your e-commerce competition. And is that competition different than your brick and mortar competition? If so, how does that impact user expectations? Because they're going to come to your app with an expectation about what shopping is going to be like, but it's not necessarily going to be, especially now that we're 4 months into people shopping very differently. They've found other places to shop and other ways to shop. And so it's important that you keep an eye out to think about your competition beyond just your standard set of competitors that you may have been thinking of when you were in a more straightforward brick and mortar setting. So I think at this point we can take questions. So I will just see what questions we have queued up. All right, so to clarify, we did test the Whole Foods app and not Amazon. So we approached it from what would someone who shops at that store, what would they go do? And if they don't know that Whole Foods is associated with Amazon and they download the Whole Foods app, what's the experience? Some people did log into their Prime account and use it. So we did see some people who went ahead and went through the process, but it was definitely a barrier to shopping when people thought that they could shop with Whole Foods. All right. So can we make this model relevant to apps developed by real estate developers or agents? Rick, maybe you'd like to speak to how the score works across different products, because I think it would be very relevant for that group. It would,
Yep.
and most useful if you think about what the tasks would be. So Rick, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, the questions are sort of summary types of evaluative questions that were designed to work for any type of product that you're interacting with. So both digital products and products with more physical interfaces. So it absolutely would work with other types of apps, real estate, or any content area. The score is not tied to any particular vertical or any particular model of interaction.
Yeah, and so I think when you're thinking about an app developed by real estate agencies, what would be important is to think about what are the common critical tasks that people are doing with those apps, and then test those, because you want people to experience the app before you score it. Yeah, so, but definitely something, I think that's a great different use case that would be easy to test, especially in a setting like this, where you have a lot of general public coming to those experiences. And so easy way to get them through some tasks and get a score. So another good question here, how do you balance letting users shop or check out as a guest with the idea of personalization or cross-channel shopping? So we did not test cross-channel shopping, but I do think, we saw people who were accustomed to using apps that were willing to log in. And I think that probably the balance is between first-time users and repeat users to some extent, because when people are experiencing your app for the first time and they're judging you against their other options, they want to get to know you as quickly as possible. And they also want to do what they came to do. So they want to know, can you help them do can you help them reach their goal as quickly as possible? Or is it going to be a lot of fussing around, and then they're still not sure whether they're going to get what they need? And so I think, that idea of guest, I think is an important one, because it kind of insinuates a first time or second time visitor. And that's probably the best use of it, is to kind of build incentives into your app experience that encourage people to want to log in or to set themselves into a logged in mode after they've used your app a few times, versus the idea that when someone experiences you for the first time, that they would be allowed to explore freely and really understand the capabilities of what they'll be able to do with the app without having to commit too much. It's a bit of a trade-off there. So another question we have here is, so what's a good UX score? And Rick, I'm gonna send that one your way.
So we're still developing norms for different verticals. And what we do know is that the score variations within a category varies quite a bit. And so that's going to affect what's considered a good score. I mean, just even in the study that we did here, in the apparel category, the average scores ranged from 4 to 5, whereas in the grocery, they range from 3 to 5. So for the groceries, a score of 4 was a good score, but in the apparel, relatively speaking, a score of 4.5 was a comparable good score. So it's really going to vary with, the category that you're assessing.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Here's another one. So did you consider the accessibility needs for people with disabilities? For example, in-app features for people with visual impairment. We did not do that in this study, but I think that is a great area to be exploring, and one that you could definitely include, where you could have people test those features and then score the app based on that. Rick, do you have other thoughts about accessibility?
So, and you can use the UX score to assess, even though the interface is going to be very different for different types of accommodations of different types of disabilities like screen readers. One of the advantages of the UX score is that you can still assess, how was that experience for you, and get a indication of, compared to people without a disability or going through a special interface, how does their experience compare with someone who's has a different set of interactions for the same site? So it's a good starting point of saying, it's comparable or there's a difference, and then you can follow up with qualitative research to understand why is there a difference in the experience.
Okay, another question here. We've got good questions today. Thank you. So what do customers think about an app having ads not related to the store they're buying from? So I have to say that none of the apps that we tested had that experience in them. So I can't speak directly to that. I think that you might see that impacts the relevance part of the score in terms of whether or not the app is doing things and helping people do what they expect or want the app to do. Because generally people skip ads when they can, and they minimize ads, and they pay for premium experiences and apps. And so I think you would probably need to see how does an ad impact the user experience. And I don't think it would be difficult to, again, you're delivering the experience the way that we're testing. You're just sending them to the URL for the app that you want them to try. They launch the app. So you can very easily test a live experience. And so if you have an app that does deliver ads in it, that would be an easy thing to test and understand what does that do to the overall experience. And so again, there you need to think about what tasks that your users want to do that are most common or most critical, and then where those ads appear so that you would be able to feel the impact of the ad on the task that they're completing, because ultimately the UX score needs to be scored after people have had the experience of working with the product. And so you want to simulate the use that you want to get the score on. You can test a narrow set of features. So to the question about accessibility, you can test that set of features. To the question about ads being presented in, in content, you could test the area of the app where that experience is happening, and then try to get to see if there are differences. So, if you really did want to get to differences, you would probably need to figure out a control so you could do an A/B test.
Yeah, and so it's a good use of the score is, do these two conditions differ? Another one that comes up a lot is, going through the site as a guest versus logging on. And if you've are a member of Logged On and you've saved, lists, and it's actually a better experience for logging on, then that gets reflected in the UX score, comparing those who do it as a guest versus those who are a member and do it. And if the benefit is only to the business and not to the user, then you're going to get far fewer people taking the time to become members and to log on to a site. And the score can give you an indication, is there really an improvement for the customer to take the time to join and to log on before they shop?
Yeah. So one last question. Any insights on where users want to go after adding to the bag? The one thing I can tell you, the biggest complaint was about going back to the page they had been on. So if I just bought a t-shirt and put it in the bag, the chances that I want to go back and buy the exact same t-shirt were very slim. So that was the least favorite outcome. There was a sense that people wanted to just be given the option to keep shopping. And so I would guess that in many cases, they either want to have easy access to the menu option. So in the case of Lululemon, where men saw men's, the men's store, and they wanted to get back to shopping, to be put back into the men's categories might be the best experience for them. The other thought is for people that have searched for something, if they choose something, go into it and shop, then what you might want to do is return them to those search results again, since that's where they were looking for items in the first place. So, all right, well, thank you guys for all your questions, and thanks for your time today. We're happy to follow up on anything else. So if questions come up after the webinar, please feel free to email either one of us. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jana and Rick. That was a really great presentation with a lot of insight. And thank you everyone for joining us today. If we didn't get to your question, then we will do so by email, and you will also receive an email with a direct link to today's recorded presentation. And of course, we welcome the opportunity to speak with you, so feel free to reach out to us directly. That now concludes today's webinar. Have a wonderful day.